This question occurred to me in light of some of the hymnody of the Feast of the Dormition, in which the Church speaks of Christ's mother following the pathway to life which he opened, that is, through death, but then her body is translated, i.e., after the Virgin Mary's resurrection. So I wondered, in light of that co-crucified, co-resurrected idea, or following Christ through death to obtain life, how can we explain the apparent translations of Enoch and Elijah before their deaths? How do they participate in the salvation of Christ? They seem to have been saved in some other way, or not need the saving work of Christ, as they had already attained into heaven in their body. So this is a really good question, and I think that the problem actually runs deeper than this, because I think Jesus is very clear in the Gospel of John. Sorry, Puggy is causing. Oh, Pug. Okay. Oh, Puggy. Okay, I'm just going to hold him here because he's walking around the microphone. So Jesus says in the Gospel of John that no one has ascended to heaven except he who has descended from heaven, that is, the Son of Man. Now, this is not just a throwaway statement in the Gospel of John. It is perhaps its central theme. In John's Gospel, we have a very extensive development of the theme of descent and ascent. Okay, so just think about the language that Jesus uses in relation to Nathanael. He says, "You will see greater things than these. You will see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Now, that phrase comes back from Genesis 28, which we talked about in the last stream. In Genesis 28, Jacob beholds a ladder to heaven. That ladder has its top in the heavens. That refers back to Babel, which means gate of God. And the Tower of Babel was described as having its top in the heavens. At least that's what the goal of the builders of Babel is. And then the word for the words that Jacob uses to describe this ladder to heaven is gate of heaven. Truly, this is the gate of heaven. Jacob beholds the God of Israel standing, I would argue, at the bottom of this ladder, i.e., whereas the builders of Babylon attempted to build their way up to God, here, God first descends in order that we might ascend. Or in St. Paul's words, he who was rich became poor for our sakes, that we by his poverty might become rich. God descends to what we are so that we might ascend to what he is. In terms of cosmic geography, heaven comes to earth so that earth might go up to heaven. Another way of talking about it is the integration or marriage of heaven and earth. But there's always an initiation and then a movement back. God moves, he creates a path, and then a path having been created is a path that we can walk, or we walk in the way of the Lord. A major theme in the Torah, major theme throughout the whole Bible, is the language of the way of the Lord. John the Baptist comes to prepare the way of the Lord. In Genesis, God tells Abraham to walk before me, or to walk in his way. Walk is the Hebrew word halak, from which we get halacha. And the idea is exposited or elucidated in Exodus 33 and 34, where Moses beholds God walking and then is transfigured or deified in walking behind him or following him. And this is where Moses receives a renewal of the covenant, i.e., Moses is the person who embodies what it means to truly obey the Torah. The Torah reveals the way of God's walking, and we following him are able to become like him. So, in the Gospel of John, Jesus' incarnation is, of course, his descent. And then Jesus ascends back to where he was before by the ladder to heaven, which is the cross of Christ. This is a major theme in John's Gospel. And then he promises his ascension at the end of the Gospel. And then in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse opens its... Uh-oh, shoot. What? Okay, that was weird. Sorry, my screen just went out for a hot minute. The apocalypse opens its narrative, which begins really in Revelation chapter 4, with a door opening in heaven. St. John, remember, who is the beloved disciple and who thus stands in for all those who are loved by Jesus. St. John enters into that door as a witness to the proceedings of the heavenly court. He beholds Jesus as the heavenly high priest, as the incarnate word, ascending as a man up to the heavenly throne room and standing before the throne of the Father. And then Jesus opens a book, and that book does things. So Jesus is the Word, so it's natural he is the heavenly liturgist who reads the content of that word which is inherent in him. And having liturgically read it, he replicates his own life in the life of creation, in the life of our world. And so by the end of the book, in Revelation chapter 20, The saints who are under the altar in Revelation chapter 6 have been taken up and been given thrones in the heavenly courtroom. Now, the only way that this is possible is because he first descended so that we might ascend. So this isn't just a throwaway passage. It's not just a throwaway line or a one-time thing, and it's not just a problem of maintaining consistency with the theology of the Virgin Mary. The issue is much more fundamental than that, about what it means for a person to be exalted to the heavenly life and how it is that a person gets taken in to the inner sanctuary where God's presence is all in all. Now, one of the worst phrases in the world is the exception that proves the rule, because that phrase has no meaning. An exception never proves a rule. If a rule is really and truly at bottom a rule, it doesn't have exceptions. If there are exceptions, it means the rule is not appropriately defined. An exception can't prove a rule. Sorry, that phrase just rubs me the wrong way, because it says nothing at all. So, all that said, what do we do then with Enoch and Elijah? Well, I think that we really only have one option here, because the word heaven in the Bible can have multiple meanings, right? And it specifically has two related meanings. So saying something has multiple meanings doesn't mean the meanings are unrelated to each other. And in fact, we can see what the two meanings of heaven are in relation to the tabernacle. So the tabernacle, the temple, as we've discussed many times before, these are architectural models of the entire creation. These are architectural models of the entire creation. The creation is triply structured. The creation is structured into earth, heaven, highest heaven, just as the tabernacle and the temple are structured into courtyard, holy, holy of holies. Okay, so we render it holy place, but it's holy, holy of holies. Well, the holy place corresponds to the visible or celestial heavens. Okay, so we see this because in the holy place, you have a table of showbread or face bread. And on the table of showbread, you have a menorah, and that menorah has 7 lights. Now, in Exodus 25-31, the language that is used to describe the sun, moon, and stars is used to describe the menorah. And these 7 lights correspond to the sun, the moon, and the 5 wandering stars, which we call the 5 planets. And so the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets are the traditional kind of 7 planets. I have a video on this in relation to the notion of 7 heavens. So we have in order, and this actually corresponds quite straightforwardly to the order of creation days and the thematic associations that are inherent in each creation day. You have the moon, the first day, Mercury, Venus. Venus is one of those really obvious ones because Venus is associated with fertility and union and fruitfulness. And what do you have on the third creation day? It's the creation of plants and fruit trees, where you have the basis for the language of fertility and multiplication. So when we talk about, fertility, we're using agricultural analogies here. We talk about fruitfulness. That means we're like trees because we bear fruit, and trees are the only things which really have fruit in a literal sense. Anyway, the 4th creation day, sun, moon, and stars corresponds to the sun. 5th creation day, you have the birds and the fish. And this it seems less straightforward, but actually I think with the associations that are inherent in biblical theology, it's very straightforward. On the 5th creation day, you have this organized cloud of birds and fish. Birds and fish, they look like kind of disorganized just groupings of things, but actually they have a very kind of well-defined structure. Rupert Sheldrake has made the argument that really the only way in which you can account for the very specific structure of flocks of birds or schools of fish is in terms of the concept of a field, where it's not as if they see another bird moving and they adjust themselves appropriately. Rather, they just have an immediate inherent kind of unity with the rest of their flock, which gives them immediate knowledge of where every other bird is in the flock, so that they move as a single kind of organism. Well, that kind of organized structure in Scripture is called a mustering. You muster an army. The way you muster an army is by blowing a trumpet. And what do you know? The 5th feast in Israel's seven feast structure is the Feast of Trumpets. Anyway, the 6th, so that's Mars, which is associated with warfare and such. And then the 6th creation day is Jupiter, which is the under king, the kind of king under the King of Kings. And Jupiter corresponds to man. Jupiter also corresponds to festivity and feasting, obviously related words. And it is on the sixth creation day that man is given food, and that the beasts are given food. The beasts are created before God delegates food for them. It's the sixth creation day, which is associated with feasting. And then finally, the seventh creation day is the Sabbath, which is associated with judgment, with the turning, with points of transition, and so on and so forth. And that corresponds to Saturn, which is about the very same thing, judgment, points of transition, so on and so forth. So the menorah corresponds to the seven traditional planets, which stand in for the entirety of the heavens. And that suggests then that the holy place corresponds to the visible heavens. The Holy of Holies is where God's throne is. The Holy of Holies is where the Ark of the Covenant is. The Ark of the Covenant is God's footstool. It's the means by which the divine presence enters into the world. It's where the high priest goes when he wants to engage directly with God. Sorry, when I'm clicking something on my screen, I'm using a touch screen, which means I'll cover it. I cover over the screen when I click something, so I'll try not to do that. The Holy of Holies is where God himself dwells, and this is the structure of the tabernacle and the temple, right? So, and it's the structure of the creation. So the first creation day, he creates the heavens and the earth. Well, is this a separate heaven than the one that's created on the second day when God divides the waters from the waters? Or is this just a summary statement of what is going to come? Well, it is, in fact, a separate, in a sense, heaven. It is where God dwells. And we see this in later biblical reflections on Creation Week, when the first slot of Creation Week is always and everywhere taken up with these themes of the angelic hosts and the divine council and so on and so forth. So take a look, for example, at Psalm 104. Psalm 104 proceeds through every aspect of creation in the order of Genesis 1. And it begins with a celebration of the worship of God by his angelic ministers who dwell in the invisible heavens or the heavenly council. We also see throughout the Bible that there's a consistent distinction that is made between these two heavens. So Solomon says, for example, that heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you, much less the house that I have built. St. Paul, when he refers to the creation of the heavens and the earth through Christ, he sees the heavens as referring to thrones and dominions and principalities and powers, i.e., the angelic hosts. That is what the heavens of Genesis 1 are, of Genesis 1:1 are. The heavens of the second creation day is a visible representation and, in a sense, a communication of that divine life to the life of terrestrial reality. And that is why, as James Jordan argues, the second creation day corresponds to the sixth creation day in that kind of chiastic structure of Genesis 1, because it is human beings who are a ladder between heaven and earth. Human beings stand upright. They are ordered in relation to the rest of the world as its Lord, and they are ordered in relation to God as his direct subject. God engages with us directly, and we engage with the rest of creation on God's behalf. That is what it means to be the image of God. Benjamin, am I extemporizing this answer? Yes, I extemporized all my answers, and it is kind of roundabout, but some people have said they like the stuff that I say in the roundabout ways. I have things to say, and in fact, I am leading towards the direct answer to this question, which is, I think, the only possible answer to the question of how Enoch and Elijah went to heaven is that they didn't go to the throne room of God, because no one had entered into the throne room of God prior to the coming of Christ. Instead, they were taken up into the visible heavens, meaning, in the terms of contemporary cosmology, they are on another planet. Now, many people say that there's no reason to think that any planets other than Earth are habitable. Now, I agree, if planets are distributed randomly with respect to their habitability, that would be the case. It's sufficiently unlikely that there would be even one planet in creation, even given its enormous size, that would be habitable if they were distributed randomly with respect to habitability. But we don't believe that they're distributed randomly with respect to habitability, because at least I don't accept the models of the development of the cosmos, which are conventional within the scientific community. I think they're probably radically wrong. I think they're more wrong than, I think they're wrong in ways that don't necessarily have a direct impact on, Christian truth. I'm just skeptical in general that after about 150 years of studying the cosmos, which is a big and complicated place, after 150 years, we still have this enormous contradiction at the heart of theoretical physics, which is fine. But if we do, that means we're missing something really big. And if we're missing something really big, well, then it seems kind of ridiculous to attempt to reconstruct the entire scope of cosmic history when we know there's a huge amount that we just have no idea how it works. So how do we know that those things which we aren't aware of would not radically affect or undermine our models of how cosmic history proceeded? In any case, I think that planets are not distributed randomly with respect to habitability, that there probably are other paradise planets out there, and they may well be uninhabited. James Jordan has made an interesting argument that if there is life on other worlds, in a biological sense, that it would definitely be what we would call plant life. I'll say more on that in one moment. I don't know if you can hear the dog, but he's asleep, so he's snorting. In any case, Enoch and Elijah, I think, would have been taken to one of these worlds. Now, many people would respond just instinctively by thinking, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Well, and I understand it on kind of an intuitive or instinctive level, but at the same time, why is it any more ridiculous than the idea of them ascending into heaven to begin with? If indeed the entire creation is subject to God's creative will, and if God has purposed for the entire creation to reflect his own life, then there's nothing, if we just take that as our kind of basic governing principle of reality, there's really nothing crazy at all about there being other beautiful habitable planets out there. Now, a couple friends of mine pointed me to a very interesting ancient Christian text, and it really is extraordinary, called The Narrative of Zosimus. I would recommend that you guys read it. It's one of the strangest and most remarkable texts I've ever read. I don't know quite what to make of it, but this is what I'll say. In the Narrative of Zosimus, we are given the story of a Christian pilgrim who is taken to another place. He's taken through a pillar of cloud, or this wall of cloud, to another land which cannot be reached by any normal human means. He's taken to this other land. On this other land, we find that God has translated the Rechabites and brought them to this other world, other land that you can't reach by just walking or sailing. The Rechabites are a kind of group of ascetics who are mentioned in the days of the prophet Jeremiah. And when he goes to this other world, and this other world is not subjected to the devil, who is referred to as kind of the Lord of our world. And the inhabitants of this other land or other world refer repeatedly to what they call the futility world, which is ours. The futility world is where the fall happened. The futility world is subject to the authority of the prince of this world. And they are somehow outside of his dominion, but they're very curious about what's going on with us, because they know that the redemption must be accomplished in the same place that the fall happened, and then it will extend outwards to reach them as well. But they are directly ministered to by angelic beings and do not appear to have any acquaintance directly with sin or evil or the devil. It's actually quite similar to C.S. Lewis's understanding of extraterrestrial beings in the Space Trilogy. So in saying that, I'm kind of showing my hand. The interesting thing about this text is that this really is how I would expect someone to talk about other people living on another planet. I know this is really deep weird. People living on another planet who didn't have kind of the language of contemporary cosmology. It's another land which you reach by going through the air. You can't reach it by walking or sailing, and it's, in many respects, it's another world, and for some reason, it's outside the scope of the devil's immediate authority or influence. Now, if we're just to roll with this, and I'm not throwing all of my weight behind this, but if we're just going to roll with this and say that is, in fact, what is conceptually going on, whether or not it's a historical narrative, and it might be a historical narrative, I have no reason to be dismissive of that idea. Well, then why would it be outside the scope of the devil's authority? Well, St. Paul refers to the devil as the prince of the power of the air. Okay, so in the language of ancient cosmology, and when I say ancient cosmology, I am referring specifically to the categories in which they conceive the world. So when we talk about cosmology, we tend to think about, okay, this is what someone believed about the world. But more significant than that, I think, is the categories in which they conceived the world. Because you can have these same categories with a wide range of different concrete ideas about the way the world is actually structured. You can have a triply structured cosmos where you have a flat Earth, or you can have a triply structured cosmos where you have a round Earth, and many, many other worlds out there. It's about the categorization much more than it is about the concrete subjects that are conceived of in those categories. Well, the air in ancient cosmology refers to the world below the moon. Okay, so remember how St. Paul refers to three heavens. So what are these three heavens? The first heaven is the air, and that begins as soon as you leave the ground. So we are in heaven right now because I am above ground. Okay, the ocean is the one thing that really is not touched by heaven. So the ocean often signifies death because it's not in the air at all. It's completely, in certain respects, underground, which is why ocean and graves are associated with each other. So the air extends all the way up to the moon. The moon is the spiritual boundary of terrestrial space. The second heaven is the visible stellar heavens, where the sun, moon, and stars are. And then the third heaven is God's heaven, what we call the highest heaven, or the heaven of heavens. That's where God's throne is. So the devil is called the prince of the power of the air. Now, why would he be conceived of in this way? Well, C.S. Lewis's Cosmic Trilogy has a really interesting kind of way of integrating the kind of spiritual or the celestial hierarchy in with the basic kind of shape of our modern conception of the universe. And the way Lewis does it is, in traditional cosmology, you have each heavenly body inhabited by and governed by a planetary or celestial archon. So each star has an angel, and that angel is responsible for moving it through the heavens. Now, you'll remember that gravity is just a description. Gravity doesn't explain anything because it's not trying to explain anything. To talk about it as explaining something is just to make a category error. All equations do is describe the way things behave. If you want to get down to the why or the causal structure of a thing's behavior, well, then you have to go to metaphysics. Now, someone like Sean Carroll, the physicist, says, well, there's no reason to think that we need an answer beyond the descriptive. And I say, yes, there absolutely is. That's just ruling a question out of court because you can't answer it. And this is fundamentally the same question of contingency versus necessity, whether we need to explain the actual causal structure of a thing or whether we just redefine the word cause to mean description. So gravity doesn't explain anything. All gravity does is describe things. And what it describes is how the same pattern of activity is descriptive of things which appear to us to be very different. So it reflects kind of an inner unity to the logi of things, an inner unity to creation, because it shows that the same tune, as it were, which describes the fall of an apple to the ground, is the very tune which describes the motion of the heavenly bodies in relation to each other. Now, the reason I'm going into this is because I want to say God directly moves things through the heavens. It is only because God is immediately present in and through all creation that he is able to confer his own energy on things, and it is only in conferring his own energy on things that things are able to move. But God brings rational beings into his governance of the world. That's part of what he does. Okay? That's what we fundamentally are. Human beings are God's partners in the creative development of the world. But human beings grow and mature and gradually through time. We begin as fetuses, and then our potentials are gradually actualized through time with the participation of our will. So our becoming a complete self is, in a certain very important way, our first act of creation. We are constantly working with God in constituting ourselves as who we are. Right now, we're persons in training. The choices that we make us different things than we would otherwise be. So as we grow, more and more of who we become is placed into the hands of our will. So certain things are not within our power. Certain things about our appearance are not within our power. They're wired into us from our parents. However, lots of things are in a great deal within our power. What we eat will change the way we look. And what we look like says something to other people. The clothes that we wear, clothes are not just coverings. They don't just cover up who we are. They also express who we are. The kinds of clothes we wear say something about us that is being placed within our power. Well, angels, and by angels, I mean the whole range of heavenly beings here. Angels immediately are what they will always be because they are simple. And by simple, I mean they're indivisible. A choice that they make in relation to God and in relation to themselves is a choice that they make with their entire self. So when we make a choice, we're making a choice in relation to a very specific aspect of ourselves. And all of our choices are kind of halting and partial, and we might turn back from them or change our mind, because that's the kind of beings we are. Human beings are complex beings. We're constituted of many different parts in operation in relation to each other. We have a body and we have a soul. And our bodies are constituted by a very, very sophisticated interaction of many different organisms and organs. And all these things are built up into a complete person. But because we're complex, that means the choices that we make are also partial. They realize a particular quality here or there. But because an angel doesn't work that way, because that's just not in the wiring of the nature of an angelic being, an angel makes the choice on behalf of its whole being, meaning that when they have willed either good or evil, that is a choice which permeates to the very core of who they are and permeates the entirety of who they are, meaning there's no turning back from it. Part of the reason there's no turning back from it is because as simple beings, they see what they see in its entirety. Seeing what they see in its entirety means that when they make their choice, the choice that they make is made in relation to every possible fact that could be relevant to it. So the devil had complete and total and comprehensive knowledge about every aspect relevant to the choice that he made, i.e., there is simply no occasion for him to reconsider because every consideration which could possibly form such an occasion was already baked into his initial choice. So angels, because of the way that they work, are the ones who are first set over the world. They are the first rational beings who are drawn into God's governance of creation. And what that means is that angels are the ones who serve as God's initial vice-regents in governing creation, which is why it is angels who are the ones God is operating in and through to move heavenly bodies in relation to each other. So, I said God is immediately present in every created thing. That is, God is the one who is conferring energy on things, enabling them to move in relation to each other. He's immediately present there. But he is immediately present there as the total causal power of the angel, or the heavenly being, who is set over or in relation to that thing which he moves. So God is moving the sun through the heavens, or he's moving Mars through the heavens. How is God moving these heavenly bodies? Well, he's doing so by virtue of his own causal power, but that causal power is present in the angelic being who is set over that body as steward. Now, circling back to the earth, C.S. Lewis, the way he develops his cosmology is each planet has a heavenly being or an archon set over it. This is an archangel. Lewis calls them the Oyarsa of that world. And for Lewis, in the World of the Space trilogy or the Cosmic trilogy, The Oyarsa of our world is the devil. He went bad, and thus he brought his subject territory with him. Now, again, I'm not throwing all my weight behind this, but it seems to me that there is a relatively decent case to be made for saying that this is possibly the way that things have actually worked. Now, the Earth is the starting point, and in a certain respect, the center of reality. It is the place where the heir to the throne is conceived. Humanity is given the entire creation as an inheritance through Jesus Christ, who is a son of Adam. And humanity is conceived here. So naturally, the foremost of all angelic princes would be given the foremost of worlds as his territory. Let me just make sure that my audio is still working. Oh boy, Scott. Okay, Scott, I'm going to put you in timeout. Here. I'm just making sure that I can. I'm keeping up with the chat box. Oh, I do want to just answer this really quick. Do I have any recommendations for the history of biblical criticism? I would really recommend that people check out Scott Hahn's work on the history of biblical criticism. It's really, I think, I haven't read it in its totality, but I really think you guys would find that very, very interesting. Okay. Let's see. Testing. Okay, good. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yes. I was speaking of the devil's prince, the power of the air, as Lord of our world, so on and so forth. So that would explain why in this very strange ancient Christian text, there is another land inaccessible by normal means of transportation, to which you get by going up through the air. And you get to this other land, and the prince of this world has no power there. But the people there are very interested in what's going on in our world because it's the central thread of history. So all of this is to say that I think we have good reason and good foundations within the biblical model of the universe to say that Enoch and Elijah, when they were taken through heaven, were not taken to God's throne room. Instead, where they were taken was to another planet, or in biblical language, they were taken to the second heaven. That's where you live if you live in the second heaven.